So I'll introduce myself real quickly. I'm Cindy Hale with the Finland Food Chain Project in Finland, Minnesota, not the country. And I am the Producer Education and Infrastructure Coordinator for the Finland Food Chain Project. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you afterwards to go to the website and check out what we're doing. We're doing a lot of cool things in terms of education, which has really all become Zoominars because of COVID. But the cool side effect of having to do meetings via Zoom is that we can record them and you can come and view them. So there's actually quite a few that are already on the website about cottage food and grafting, and I can't remember all of the others. So I'm going to be going pretty quick through these slides on product of the farm. Basically, product of the farm is a category. I don't know, it's an exclusion from the laws of licensing. So as you as a grower are able to, it allows you as a farmer and a producer to sell your product directly without licensing. A lot of the slides and the content that you're going to see here are part of the Blazing Trails Through the Jungle of Local Food Regulations, which was put together by the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Ag, Renewing the Countryside, and the Minnesota Farm Markets Association, all of which are also really great resources for these kinds of information, these kinds of questions if you have questions related to licensing food product of the farm. So what is product of the farm? It means that you as a grower can sell what you can sell and to whom you can sell without a license. If you don't hear me answer questions you're having, then just definitely type them into the chat box. What this is not today, because it's too much, is a comprehensive overview of all Minnesota food laws. I'm really chunking this up. We did one on cottage food. We'll be doing others on different areas. But today it's product of the farm. So that's the statute. If you want to go read it, it's legalese and it's not that great. It's not fun reading, but it's there. So, so product of the farm. The good news is you as a grower can sell the product of your farm garden to any buyer, including food facilities, without a license. It has to be from your own or rented land, and it can include no off-farm ingredients. And that's a really important piece that we'll get to as we get into the minutia a little bit. So a couple examples: cultivated mushrooms grown in a growth chamber in a cellar's basement. That's product of the farm. You can sell it to a restaurant without a license. You grow herbs in a 6x6 raised bed in your backyard. That's product of the farm. So it gives growers a lot of freedoms. But it also is important to realize that it doesn't absolve you of all responsibility. So one thing that's important, and I as a grower have experienced this when I'm talking to restaurants, they're like, are you a licensed farm? And it's like, there is no such thing as a licensed farm. There's often confusion among lingo between restaurants and farms, because restaurants are inspected and the authority for their inspection is the MDH, Minnesota Department of Health. But farms are the authority for inspection, licensing, all that stuff is MDA, Minnesota Department of Ag. And every once in a while, the lingo's a little different. So if a restaurant says, well, are you a licensed farm? You can simply say, as a grower, I'm offering these to you as product of the farm, which doesn't require a license. In restaurant food safety lingo, it's super important to them that they get their food from a, quote, approved source, and know as a locally grown grower under product of the farm, you are, quote, an approved source without being licensed. There are a couple exceptions we'll get into, but we'll just gonna, so this, I liked this visual because it really kind of shows you that there's Department of Health who inspects restaurants and all that kind of stuff, and there's Department of Ag, and while they kind of line up, sometimes they get confusing. So it's just important to understand the regulations are exactly the same. It's just who's responsible for the inspection and authority. So that's an important detail. And the best thing you can do as a grower is understand the laws and the rules and the regulations as best you can, so that if you have a vendor that you want to sell to and they are confused by something, or they think you need a license when you don't, you can walk them through that. And then there's always resources like the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Ag, Minnesota Farm Workers Association, others that can help us walk through that. And that's what we're here for too, with the Minnesota or the Finland Food Chain Project. So again, product of the farm allows you to sell without a license, but it's not an exclusion from food safety. You still have to follow good management practices. You still have to label your products, including the farm name, address, type of food, weight, date, those relevant kinds of things. And processing, and we'll get into what processing means, is allowed. And we're going to get into the details of processing, so don't freak out on that yet. But if you're doing further processing of your on-farm product, it can't be in a private residence. It can be in a separate or attached commercial kitchen or processing space, but you cannot use the same kitchen, or in particular freezers, for meat. You can't commingle your product of the farm meat that you're going to be selling with your personal food. So that's a really important piece. And most farms that we consider small diversified farms, like in northern Minnesota, are exempt from the FSMA. So Food Safety Management Act, it's a federal rule that says you got to do all this stuff if you're going to sell fresh produce. But there are exemptions. And so does your farm grow, harvest, pack, or hold produce? If the answer is no, then you're not under FSMA. Does your farm on average have less than $25,000 in annual sales production? If the answer is yes, you have less than $25,000 in sales, you are not covered by FSMA. So you're not required to follow, you're not covered by this rule. If you sell more than $25,000 a year in annual production, is the product you sell a commodity that is identified by the FDA as rarely consumed raw, which is not intuitive. Things like asparagus. I eat raw asparagus, but that's on the list. So there's a long, comprehensive list. That link below takes you to a really nice list. And then there's actually on the Minnesota Department of Ag website, there's a wonderful wizard, this grower question thing, this little green box that says grower question. It leads you through the steps. It'll ask you these questions. Do you grow what you sell? What is your income? What products do you sell? And it will lead you through, and basically at the end of that questionnaire tell you, yes, or you're exempt from FSMA, or you need to follow FSMA. And so these are good resources in terms of finding out whether you're covered by FSMA or not. And in addition to that, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture will do an on-farm readiness review for you. If you walk through that wizard and you're like, I just still don't know if I need to do this, that, or the other thing, you can request an on-farm readiness review from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, which is very helpful. I know a lot of people tend to think that inspectors are to be avoided, but really they are good people, and they really want to help you. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, some terms to be familiar with. In the FSMA lingo, you're going to hear qualified end user and non-qualified end user. As product of the farm, you are able to sell your produce, vegetables, meat, various other things direct to consumers, to schools that do not redistribute it. So if you're selling it to a district and they redistribute it to the schools, Can't do that under product of the farm. But if you're selling directly to the school that is then consuming it or serving it to their students and staff, that's covered under product of the farm. Restaurants within the same state or within 275 miles of the farm. Those qualified end users are who you can sell to as product of the farm that do not require additional FSMA hurdles to be jumped over. If you want to start selling to a wholesale warehouse, distributor, broker, or restaurants outside the state, then you have to go through a licensing process. And so that's what the non-qualified end user refers to. Couple other definitions that are important to understand. Food is every ingredient involved in something humans eat or drink. A sale, anytime food changes hands in any way, even if no money is exchanged. So donations are considered sale. So they're relevant. A person is actually an individual, a firm, partnership, a cooperative, blah, 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 blah. An individual is an actual flesh and blood person. And sometimes in these regulations, those distinctions become really important. So it's just good for you to know that these definitions exist and that when you're reading the regulations, they don't confuse you. Because a person seems like it would be a flesh and blood person, but it can mean a corporation. Okay, so product of the farm. There's all kinds of stuff that you can sell as a grower under product of the farm. Meats, poultry, eggs, fruits, vegetables, flowers, mushrooms, herbs, nuts, grains, dry beans, honey, maple syrup, blah, 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 wild forest stuff. You'll notice dairy is not on the list. Dairy always requires some kind of license or inspection, so that's an exception. The three things in blue, meat, poultry, and shelled eggs, have a few extra criteria that you need to meet, but you can still sell them under product of the farm without a license. These are great resources that are on the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Ag website. And again, remember this slideshow and everything is going to be on the Finland Food Chain website, so you don't have to scribble down these links. They will be available to you. These are actually really, really good resources if you have questions about the various categories of product of the farm foods. So meat with no added ingredients. So you can't salt it unless you can grow salt, which last I checked, you can't grow salt in northern Minnesota. So some of these things require additional shell eggs. Let's go to shell eggs because lots of people sell shelled eggs. Locally raised shelled eggs are legal to sell to food facilities without a license. Eggs are product of the farm. If you, this farmer, is selling them to, and you can sell them to a co-op. Co-ops can buy your eggs and then handle them and sell them to the end user without a license. However, with shelled egg, the one exception is that some healthcare facilities require pasteurized eggs, and in that situation, you wouldn't be able to sell them unless you pasteurize your eggs. Shelled eggs do have candling, grading, and labeling requirements to sell to food facilities and individuals at farm markets. The only exception to the grading, candling, and labeling requirement is if you're selling them directly to individuals. Remember, an individual is a flesh and blood human being. A person is a business or a individual. And only if you're selling those shelled eggs from your farm. So if they're driving to your farm and buying your eggs, you don't have to candle and grade them. But if you're selling to a food facility or individuals at a farm market, then you do have to candle and grade and label your eggs. Okay, and that link again provides all the information on what you need to do and how that grading, candling, labeling happens. There is a registration. It's not a license. This is totally free. It's one page. It's literally your name and address and a signature saying that, hey, I know that I am selling these shelled eggs as under the small flock poultry and egg producer exclusion. And it's, you know, it's easy. Do it. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Okay, poultry. So the next thing from shelled eggs is the poultry, because you're going to sell hens or something at some point in time. So poultry can be sold to individuals from the farm location or at a farmer's market, and they can be processed under inspection, like at USDA or a state equal to, or using the on-farm, on-processing exemption. And just so, and I'm going to talk about this again, I'm going to flesh this out a little bit, but just the on-farm processing poultry exemption does allow you to cut the bird up. So you can cut it up and sell packs of wings and packs of thighs and packs of, so it's actually pretty flexible in terms of what you can do under this small farm on-farm processing exemption. So product of the farm, whole chicken. So these are the labeling requirements. You need to say what it is. Whole chicken. You list the exempt PL and your name and address, and then these safe handlings. All of this, these little doohickeys that you got to put on your label are downloadable from the MDA website. So it's really quite easy to be in compliance. You need to use, if you register for on-farm processing, you again don't need a license, but you still have to use sanitary conditions.
Hey, Cindy?
Yes.
Quick question back on the, oh, perfect, that one right there, that egg form. So is that a requirement or is that a voluntary thing?
It is voluntary.
It is voluntary, okay.
It is voluntary, but it's a really good idea. We did eggs and on-farm processing for upwards of 10 years. And the reason they want this is if there's ever an issue, they want to be able to contact small processors. The MDA needs to be able to contact small processors. So this is just a way for them to know that you're out there and you exist. They're really not looking to come out and, inspect and, get in your business. It's really, and the other interesting thing is, so I came back to this same form because it's exactly the same form, whether you're doing eggs or on-farm processing. It's a registration only, it's free, and it just lets them know that you are either selling eggs or doing on-farm processing.
Yeah, and I will say that I have sold eggs at a farmer's market that actually required the certificate in hand for you to be able to sell eggs at their farmers market.
Oh, well, it's
so the farmers market. Yeah, they required you to do this. But
so, yeah, I can't speak to specific it is voluntary.
Yeah,
as far as I know. So
yeah, but it was just a farmers market that said we wanted everyone to do this if you were going to sell
do the registration, and that I think that's frankly wise from a farmers market perspective that they're covering their liabilities. Yeah. Speaking of which, it's still the responsibility of the producer to have appropriate insurance. If somebody has a foodborne outbreak from something you sell, you're still on the hook. So meat and poultry sold to a farm business must be inspected either by USDA or Minnesota Equal To. Minnesota Equal To is just a fancy way of saying Minnesota processors that are equal to USDA standards. And there's lots of different, So the only real big significant difference of USDA and Minnesota Equal To is that USDA can cross state lines, and that can be really relevant for us in the Arrowhead because we might be going back and forth across state lines into Wisconsin. Or if you're on the western side of Minnesota going into the Dakotas. Minnesota Equal To, you can't cross state lines. So that's the most relevant piece there in terms of the inspection. And these are these are examples of the little, they're called bugs that need to go on your label. And whoever your processor is, they're going to have these. You don't have to download them and make them. Your processor is going to have these. If your processor doesn't have these, you should be asking, why am I using that processor? Okay, so meat products. Again, this is a really nice publication. So now I'm going, so the first one was meat and poultry sold to a food business, so a restaurant or a healthcare facility or something, has to be inspected. Now we're just looking at meat sold to individuals, remember, live, fresh and bud person, at a farmer's market, must be inspected. And that's pork, beef, rabbit, lamb, and rabbit. Rabbit used to be covered under the poultry on-farm exclusion. It is not anymore. So if you're selling rabbits to individuals at a farmer's market, it needs to be under inspection, either USDA or Minnesota Equal to. Okay, meat packages, same thing. So if you're gonna be selling a box of pork and it's gonna have different cuts in it, that needs to be under inspection. All right. So, but there is such a thing, I'm sure a lot of you know, of custom exempt sales of meat and poultry. So meat and poultry can be sold live to a customer prior to slaughter and then processed at a licensed custom facility. So people who do deer hunting and they don't want to process their own deer, they're often taking that to a custom processor, and that processor cuts it up and wraps it and does all that for them. So you, as product of the farm, can sell a live animal to a customer, take it to a facility. The customer fills out what's called a cut sheet. So it tells them, I want this many steaks and ground and whatever. So the customer is defining how they want their animal processed. You can do the pass-through of the processing cost through your farm. So the customer is paying you for the animal, and then they're paying the processing facility for the processing, but you can pass through those processing costs. So it's a single transaction as long as you itemize those on the invoice that you give to your customer.
Question, Cindy.
Yes.
How does this interact with a farmer's ability to, like, if someone just came to the farm and bought meat off of them on the farm, is that still covered under all this, or is that like a separate creature?
So this is, yeah, so this is the customer's buying the live animal, and it sounds weird, I get it. The customer is buying the live animal before it's processed. And
Okay.
then they're defining how it's going to get processed. And then you can deliver it. You can pick it up at the processor and you can deliver it to them. But it's not the same as you processing a steer and then somebody can come to the farm later and buy a steak. No, not the same thing. Meat sold to an individual, either on the farm or at a farmer's market, needs to be done under inspection. If you're selling just cuts, this custom exempt allows you to sell it in the half or the whole. And that's where it gets weird, because you can buy a quarter of a live cow and a half of a live sheep. I don't think you can buy half of a live chicken. That just seems weird. But it does allow for the farmer to sell quarters, halves, and wholes of a live animal. The key is that the transaction or the sale of the animal happens prior to slaughter, and that the customer is giving the cutting and processing instructions to the exempt facility. Usually you're passing that through, like when I sell my lamb custom exempt, I send my customer a cut sheet, they fill it out. When I take the lambs into the processor, I hand them all of these cut sheets each cut sheet has the name of the customer. When I get that lamb back, each box has a customer name on it. That box is for customer A. That box is for customer B. You can't be crossing that. You can't be pulling cuts out and mixing and matching. Custom exempt, they're buying the quarter, the half, or the whole animal prior to processing, and then things go from there.
And is there a poultry exemption on that, or is poultry and rabbit?
So poultry, yeah. So the custom exempt, if you're not with poultry, you have the on-farm processing exclusion. So if you
Okay.
register, you can do on-farm processing and sell directly to customers.
And rabbits do or
If
don't fall under that?
rabbits do not,
Okay.
rabbits cannot be processed on farm and sold without. So yeah, they need to be processed under a license, under an at an inspected facility.
Okay.
So yeah, this is if you're not doing the processing. So say you're raising chickens and you're not doing on-farm processing, but you don't want to do USDA processed. I know this is sounding crazy. Okay, so you're raising chickens. You don't want to process them yourself. If you're processing them on your farm yourself and selling them directly to customers, you can do that. If you don't want to process them yourselves and you either don't have access to or don't want to use an inspected facility, this is how you deal with that. You sell the live chicken ahead of time, and then you can have a custom exempt facility process it for the customer. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
I kind of was splitting hairs there. I'm hoping I kind of carved that appropriately, pun intended.
Well, I think someone else is splitting the hairs. You're just trying to describe how
I'm trying to interpret how the hair is split. So when you do custom exempt, this is how your meat comes back. It's stamped not for sale. If you see this for sale at a farm market, big no-no. I mean, it happens. You see it, but it's a big no-no. This is a custom exempt. This meat should be going directly from the processor to the end customer. You don't get to put it in a freezer and then sell it to customers at a farm market. Custom exemption is just for animals that are purchased prior to processing and then delivered directly to the end user immediately after processing. Does that make sense? Kind of almost?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So storage and transport, you still have to transport all this stuff safely. If it's frozen, 0 degrees, fresh, 41 degrees, dates marking, you know, expiration, and shelled eggs have to be transported under 45 degrees. So frozen meat can be transported in a non-mechanized refrigeration system, i.e. cooler, so long as it's no longer than 4 hours. So when you're planning your deliveries of your custom exempt animals, I have the route, I have the dates, the routes, and the times scheduled with my customers. Okay, I'm coming from the processor, and at 10 o'clock I'll be at your house, and at 10:15 I'm going to be at your house, and blah, blah, blah. So I can deliver them quickly, and they are not outside of mechanical refrigeration or freezing for more than 4 hours. Okay. Okay. I know I've thrown a lot at you quickly here, but yeah. So produce, on to produce. Much more simple, right? Well, yes, sometimes no. Cultivated mushrooms. So cultivated mushrooms can be sold as product of the farm to individuals and food businesses. Simple. It's when you get to wild harvested mushrooms, it gets a little weird. So wild harvested mushrooms from your own land can be sold to individuals as product of the farm, but they can't be sold to a food business without the mushroom certification system. So for those who aren't savvy on mushrooms, because there's been an explosion in wild harvest mushroom, there's a big demand for them. There are risks with wild harvesting mushrooms. If the person who's doing it doesn't know their stuff, you can confuse things that are not so good with things that are really good. So there's the Minnesota Food Code requires that food businesses purchasing any wild harvest mushrooms can only purchase them from an approved source. Remember earlier I said as product of the farm, you can be an approved source. This is one exception. You can only be, for wild harvested mushrooms, you are only approved source if you're holding an identification certification for that particular species of wild mushroom. Did I confuse anybody there? If you're cultivating the mushroom, It's product of the farm. You can sell it to individuals and food businesses. If you're wild harvesting, you can sell them to individuals as product of the farm, but not to a food business unless you have the certification. And here's the big bummer about the certification. They're not being taught right now because of COVID. So it really sucks for those people who were hoping to get certified this year, because that's just not an option right now. Okay. And Stefan, you're going to let me know what questions come up on that, because I know. And so other wild forage foods, herbs, flowers, nuts, other edible plants or portions of plants can qualify as products of the farm if they're harvested on lands you rent or own. So you don't own the Superior National Forest. So that's not product of the farm. Okay? It would be great if it was. So if you're harvesting food, wild foods on lands you don't own or rent, you need a food handler's license. And for some place, especially wild rice is a great example, you might need a permit from the authority to have the ability to harvest those. Similarly, on national resources, you often have to have a forager's permit or something to harvest things. So you need to kind of educate yourself about the requirements are if you're starting to wild harvest off of lands that you own or rent. Okay. All right, so MDA licenses aren't that bad if you're doing a lot of wild harvesting. It might be worth it to you to spend $77 a year to get a retail food handler's license. If you want to sell to a food facility, you'll need a wholesale food handler's license. Starts at $57 a year and it goes up related to the dollar figure of sales you have. They're not difficult to apply for. They're not terribly costly. And it's, you know, if you're doing a lot of wild harvesting and you're selling to individuals and or food facilities, it's worth getting that license. All right. Woo, I'm whipping through here. Okay. So, product of the farm, you can process fruits and vegetables. There are two triggers that stop that item from being product of the farm, and that would then require a license. So if someone other than the farmer who grew it is selling it, so Sam at the farm market can't sell my product to the farm for me. I have to be there selling it. If you add any off-farm ingredients, so no salt, no sugar, that takes it out of product of the farm and into either cottage food or licensed food. Processing is not a trigger to require a license, but it might require an inspection or commercial facility, a food safety plan. So for example, here, making vegetables presentable is not processing. You do have to use potable water, duh. But trimming, washing, husking things, that's not processing. What's processing? Peeling, shredding, dehydrating, bagging, canning, fermenting, slicing, wrapping, freezing, waxing, and treatments for ripening. So you can do a lot to your product of the farm. Again, what were the triggers? Only you can sell it to the end user, and you can't add any off-farm ingredients. Make sense? And you still have to use basic hygiene. Okay, so you can do this with potable water in a kitchen. So you can do shredded bagged carrots, sliced carrots, chunks of squash, frozen berries. So you need to have an appropriate sanitary, not your kitchen. You have to have a separate, you know, appropriate facility to do this kind of processing on farm. You don't require a license, but you can't use your home kitchen to slice and bag cabbage, peel and slice carrots. You need to have your own commercial grade. And that's not, I mean, we're talking stainless steel sinks, stainless steel cabinets, knives and utensils that are not used for your own personal. So it doesn't have to be costly or insane. It just needs to be separate and appropriate and sanitary. Okay? I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions on that, but what the heck. Okay, yes, you can do kombucha. You can do tea, you can do fruit juice, vegetable juice. Some things like fruit juices, in particular apple juice, if you are not so apple juice is one that can really be a bugaboo because the FDA requires a HACCP plan for apple juice, and apple cider is apple juice. You know, it's basically apple juice, right? You can call it cider, but it's still apple juice. So if you're going to sell unpasteurized apple juice, you need a HACCP plan. Yeah, we might have to do a whole thing on HACCP, but, and remember, all the ingredients have to be from you or it requires a license. So kombucha, can you use black tea in a kombucha that is product of the farm? No, because you're not growing the black tea. Well, if you're growing the black tea, if you're adding sugar, again, that's not product of the farm. So technically you can do kombucha, but only if you're using all the ingredients that you produce. Okay? All right. Vinegar, same thing. And for kombucha and vinegar, you really do have to have a technique for measuring the alcohol. If you go over 2% alcohol, you can get in a lot of trouble. You don't want to be in trouble with the feds on alcohol. You can even do meads, wines, beers, and spirits as product of the farm, but you do need to be registered and have insurance and file paperwork with the TTB. And it's not fun. So there you go. You can technically do it, but it's there's a lot of hoops to jump through. Okay, mixed ingredient products. Yes, mixed ingredient products can be products of the farm as long as, say it together, every ingredient in there you grew. Yay! If you don't grow all the ingredients, then that means you're going to go to cottage food or get a license. Cottage food, we have a whole Zoominar on the Finland Food Chain website on cottage food, so go there. You can learn a lot about cottage food. I really demystified it, wouldn't you say, Stefan?
Yes.
So again, you're responsible for the safety of your product, even if after it leaves you, you can be held liable for injuries or foodborne illnesses. The moral of the story, have insurance. Traceability is a requirement too, so that's where the labeling and dating comes into place. Water, if it doesn't go without saying, you need to have safe water. If you are on a private well, you need to get it tested annually for coliform. And also this must maintain isolation distances. This is the thing I see some farmers getting into trouble with, is that you don't try to understand all of this here. It's going to be on. The point is, this is what I've seen occasionally, is that animals get too close to a wellhead. An animal can't be closer than 50 feet from a wellhead because it just risks that leaching of or surface flow of manure and other animal related byproducts end up in your well. So it's important that you understand these required distances from your wellhead, and just be cognizant of not letting things, the cesspool or leach pit has to be 75 feet from your wellhead. So if you're using a well, just be cognizant of these distances that you need to maintain. There's a Minnesota well index. If you want to try to look up a well, you can. It's kind of fun. Okay. Oh, that was it. Okay. Questions?
We had one question that came across on Facebook. You may or may not know the answer. It's a little more specific, but somebody is wondering if you happen to know if ZUPS is a custom exempt processor.
You'd have to ask ZUPS.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, if they do, yeah, you'll have to ask ZUPS. Are you a custom exempt, or are they Minnesota equal to? They might be equal to. So I know, and I think there might even still be a list of Minnesota Equal To and USDA and custom exempt processors in Minnesota. But my experience is never up, it's never really up to date. So if you want to know if Zups is a custom processor or Minnesota Equal To, ask them. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe if there are no other questions, another one came across, wondering if you can maybe chat for a second about insurance, meaning insurance if you're selling product of the farm foods.
Yeah.
What
So
would that look like?
so my experience with insurance is that it really, really pays to work with an insurance agent who knows farms. Your average everyday insurance agent isn't going to know the first thing. They get terrified as soon as they hear that you have chickens or cows. It's like, ah! So definitely talk to an insurance agent that is versed in farms. The best way to find them is by talking to your other farmer friends. Referrals are a really good way to find a good insurance agent that knows farms. And there's plenty of them in this region. There's no shortage of them. General liability insurance for up to $1 million in coverage doesn't have to be super expensive. Depending on what you're doing, it might be a few $100s. We have a full commercial enterprise. We wholesale, we retail, we do live animal sales, we do licensed food product, cottage food, and we are paying $3,000 a year for our commercial liability insurance. We're much bigger and have a lot more coverages than your average product of the farm producer. So don't be terrified by the word insurance. Talk to an insurance agent that specializes in farm insurance, and you're going to get much better service.
Okay, we had another question come across. So if a grower is exempt from the FSMA, can their products be sold across state lines then?
Yes, because FSMA, okay, I might have to double check on this one. FSMA is a federal rule, but it's interpreted by the states. So,
so if, for instance, like you wanted to sell to Wisconsin, you would have to find out how Wisconsin interprets FSMA.
Yes. So that's what you would need to do. So if you're going to sell to the Shawamigan Co-op, and the nice thing about co-ops and stuff like that is they know these rules very well. They know what, okay, where's my FSMA? Yeah. So that's a really good question. So FSMA is a federal law, but it's interpreted and implemented by the states. So the question of if you're exempt from FSMA, you're exempt from SFMA. That's a federal exemption. Okay. It's not a state exemption.
That's not a state exemption.
Yeah, state interprets it and is the authority for enforcement, but they don't create the exemption. The exemption is in the federal law. So if you're exempt from FSMA, you're exempt from FSMA. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good question. Excellent question. Yeah.
Someone's asking if you could swing back head to the well slide again.
Yeah.
They're from Facebook, so they just wanted to take a look at it, I guess.
Yeah. And again, these will be posted on the Finland Food Chain website. And that slide, in fact, this slide, so that's everything. This one I kind of zoomed in and circled on the animal feedlot. Do they want the other one or? This is in the Blazing Trails website presentation as well, which you can download if you just Google Blazing Trails Food Regulation Minnesota. You can download their 162 slide PowerPoint presentation and spend a lot of quality time with it yourself. That's where I got this. So it's a good location for information. what we're trying to do with the Finland food chain is chunk things up a little so that we're delivering you some of this content in a more digestible fashion that's really targeted to, you know, like cottage food specifically, product of farm specifically, things like that. But this is a great resource. All right.
Corey says to tell you that you've done much better than the Blazing Trails presentation.
Oh, yay! It is the Blazing Trails. They try to do everything in one presentation, and it is just overwhelming. It's too much. So, but their slideshow is their PowerPoint. You can download it as a PDF or as a PowerPoint. It's really comprehensive. That's the good thing about it. But it's just 160 slides, 160 pages of every regulation under the sun. It's just confusing. And so I think that's really why we've decided to kind of chunk it up in this way. So yeah, thank you, Corey. More questions. I can't have been that good. No way.
I'm not seeing any others coming across from Facebook or in the chat room. So unless there's something else you'd like to say, or one last call for questions.
Yeah, one last call for questions. If anybody wants to unmute themselves.
If anyone's watching on at least on Zoom, Corey had posted the actual food chain link to the cottage food presentation that you gave back in May.
Oh, okay.
Or in April, but so that link is there.
Yep. Yep. And in addition, so we have the cottage food presentation, which I again think was very good. And then there's one on bench grafting with Deb Schubot, which was real. That was our very first like virtual Zoominar, and we were very proud of ourselves about how well that went, because grafting is a difficult thing to teach virtually, and I think it's a really nice presentation. So if you're interested in learning about bench grafting, and then we did one on wild harvesting.
We had the chicken panel is now up there
the
too.
Chicken panel. Yeah, we did a first of what will be multiple series on chicken production in Minnesota, and that chicken workshop was fabulous, really good, and we're going to definitely do more of that. And then we're going to have another one in August. Stefan, you're going to be doing one on
kind of more homestead and small farm scale, like kind of what we've applied at the Agroecology Center.
Yeah. So, and you know, we love to get feedback from people who join us virtually. Let us know if there's a topic that we don't have slated that you would like us to see doing, because we're here to serve you. I mean, we have great ideas, of course, but sometimes we don't get them all. So it's really important. We really, really welcome and are thankful for feedback from people. If you want to see a topic covered that we haven't talked about yet, please let us know, because we are here to serve you.
Okay, I think that's all.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you again in the Zoom land.
Have a great Saturday, everyone.
All right.